Today, I've got a thorough review based on my experiences with the new Eureka Mignon Oro single-dose grinder. First, we'll consider how it looks, how it works, and how the coffee tastes using both espresso and pour-over and comparing it to the Eureka Specialita and the Niche Zero. Then I'll do a partial teardown and evaluate the component quality and mechanical design. I've got to warn you, I ran into a number of snags, all of which I was able to resolve, but this shakeout run uncovered 3 major issues that could influence your buying decision, along with several minor ones, so stick around while we put her to the test. Oh my God.
It's like a miracle.
It's a good-looking unit, I think you'll agree. Clearly targeting the Niche Zero with its oak accents and forward-leaning attitude. When I first saw pictures of it, I didn't expect to like it all that much, but it looks way better in real life. Motor performance is up a bit from 1350 RPM, drawing 310 watts, to 1650 RPM, drawing 320 watts. The burrs have grown to 65 millimeters, so maybe we'll see professional grind speed. It's got a long power cord with a good strain reliever and a fused plug. Very nice. The machine vibrates quite a bit, so it has 6 gummy, sticky feet to prevent it wandering around the kitchen. More on that issue later. We have a small hopper that accommodates a bellows and a cap made of oak that harmonizes visually with the cup stand. There's also a clear plastic lid if you prefer. I think the wood looks great, and the bellows makes for better overall proportions, so I prefer to keep the bellows on using the wooden cap. However, the joint between the hopper and the bellows is poor. There's a channel in the rubber here, but it's too shallow for adequate friction. It's irritating to mount the bellows, which kind of undoes itself as you work your way around. And once you finally get the thing together, a gentle push will upset it. The cup stand is made of oak from 3 pieces, with the grain direction alternating between horizontal and vertical, or slab and quarter sawn. That will make it stable, even in a kitchen where the humidity changes frequently. There's no way this is going to warp. We've got an enormous steel spacer that reminds me of a shuffleboard puck. It's out of proportion to the cup that sits on it. It uses 2 O-rings to prevent chattering, a bit like cracking a nut with a sledgehammer, but it works all right and looks fine. The cup is nicely done. The brushed inner surface resists static cling. The outside diameter is 55.9 millimeters, meaning it will accommodate any portafilter basket with an inside diameter of 56 millimeters or more. Here I'm using it with a 58 millimeter basket, and it works nicely. I've never had any problem using it. Static cling is a perennial issue with the Niche's cup, even after the change to a double-walled one. There's no such problem here. It always empties cleanly. Of course, I'd like a bigger cup to accommodate larger doses for pour-over. Eureka sells one as an accessory, but I would encourage them to supply both cups in the box. Really, you shouldn't have to order something separate to make your grinder work. With the Oro and the Niche, you're tied to the dosing cups. You really can't fit much under either of them. With the Specialita, you can dose into just about anything. A Turkish coffee pot, a portafilter, a mocha pot funnel, an AeroPress, a V60 or Kalita funnel, or a small French press. So the Spet gets props for versatility. This gate valve is thin and sharp and has a poorly finished edge. It was very tight, really hard to move, but it was easy to fix, as I'll explain later. This is one of the 3 major issues I spoke of. The rocker switch back here is less convenient than it could be. A second switch closer to the front and the top, where your hand naturally tends to hang out, would be nice. Also, for safety, I'd like the rocker to be illuminated whenever the unit is plugged in, and for a second toggle switch to be necessary to activate the motor. Otherwise, if you open it for cleaning, having forgotten to unplug it, you could easily bump it in such a way as to switch it on and grind something a lot more valuable than coffee. You'll notice that the grind adjustment knob is bigger now. When I reviewed the Specialita, I said that the knob couldn't be any smaller and still permit you to dial in. Now it feels much better. Unfortunately, they relocated the reference marks from the top to the side. Thanks to the tilt angle, the marks are now impossible to read unless you're seated or a child. So how does it grind? At 2 rotations away from where the burrs just touch, about where you'd expect a pour-over grind, the knob became very loose. I couldn't feel any load from the spring. I wondered if that could be an illusion because I'm used to the Specialita and a larger knob gives you more leverage. So I went ahead and made some pour-over. And this is what I got. Mud on top of sand. I could hardly believe my eyes. I wasn't expecting anything newsworthy and didn't have my camera ready, so I hastily set it up and made another batch, which you're looking at here. This is the second major issue. My new grinder was completely dysfunctional, but not for long. This is quite easy to fix, and I'll explain how to do it later in the teardown part of the review. Unfortunately, some users might not be familiar with the Mignon's adjustment linkage and would assume, incorrectly, that their new machine was defective or junk and promptly return it. Once I got it set up, everything started looking better. I got some truly delicious coffee out of it. However, I encountered numerous minor snags along the way. For some people, probably too many. For others, like myself, it could be fun. This grinder is not for everyone. I want you to consider carefully whether or not it's for you, so I'm going to be pretty thorough and methodical here. Now would be a good time to make a pot of coffee and settle in. First up, noise. I'm using a simple phone app, so these readings have only a vague connection with reality, but this is fine for making comparisons. The Specialita is nice and quiet, registering 65 decibels unloaded and 85 while grinding. The Zero is louder, obviously, because it's got a gearbox. Plastic gears help, but it's still showing 75 decibels unloaded and 85 grinding. The new Oro single dose is by far the loudest at around 75 decibels unloaded and 90 while grinding. It vibrates far too much and it shouts at you. Not what I'm looking for first thing in the morning. This is the third major issue. You get really nice fluffy grounds though. The motor has got a lot of torque and the speed is remarkable, with pour-over better than 3 grams per second and espresso better than 2 grams per second. That's fast enough for light commercial duty in a low volume shop. I emphasize light duty because the unit doesn't have a cooling fan, so the motor could easily overheat if it's used too often. Besides, quick though it is, it's still too slow for a busy shop. The Zero is sluggish at around 1 gram per second, so it's not a fair contest and I'm excluding it. You don't buy it for speed, you buy it for ease of use, delicious coffee, and, well, charm. Now let's look at retention. The SPED is off the hook here as it's not marketed that way. The Zero, on the other hand, well, we all know it's not zero. For my tests, I ran 25 grams through on a pour-over setting. I'd wait about 15 minutes for the static charge to dissipate, then give them both a good jostling. Static charge is a tough problem. Once it fades, after 10 or 15 minutes, coffee clumps will loosen and drop. I did this 10 times, but the results I'm about to show are characteristic. The Zero holds on to about 4/10 of a gram. The single dose holds 2/10. I would call both very good, but neither of them zero. So, how was the coffee that I made using this baby? Let's look at pour-over first. As you'll see later during the teardown, the Oro's burr geometry is similar to the Specialita's, and there are only slight differences in flavor. So from here on, I'll compare the Oro to the Zero. This is the aftermath from 30-gram doses with 400 milliliters of water. Both grinders were dialed in for a 4.5-minute brew time exactly. The sample on the left was ground with the Oro single dose. This is exactly how things look when I use the SPET. You'll see a healthy amount of fines clinging to the sides, but virtually no overflow onto the bottom surface. This lets you grind finer, and that gives the coffee strength and a broad flavor profile. Coffee from the Zero on the right shows a lot of spillover from proportionally more fines. They're built up in a considerably thicker layer on the surface. The overall grind size had to be a bit coarser to hit the same time target. Because of the finer grinding overall, the single dose made strong coffee with real complexity and subtlety. The Zero favors the richness and roundness and bitterness from the greater proportion of fines, a bit milder with more low end, let's say. For espresso, the Oro made something, again, almost identical to the Specialita. Really balanced, yet punchy and flavorful. The shots ran beautifully, with no hint of mechanical flaws like channeling. Technically, it's a great grinder, but so is the niche. If you prefer espresso with a more decadent, old-school flavor profile, the Zero is as good as it gets in the prosumer market. The coffee has plenty of dynamic range, it just favors the richer end of the scale. And the niche is great from a practical point of view. Like the Mignons, it will hold your last grind adjustment when you take it apart for cleaning. And to be honest, I have never used an electric grinder that's so easy to dial in. It's a fine choice for beginners who are serious about their coffee. The single dose, like the Specialita, has a slightly broader range of flavors with exceptional balance, giving you that sharper, more modern profile. It is definitely more of a challenge to dial in, but the larger adjustment knob is a noticeable improvement. Still, it's easy to forget where you parked it, especially if you wander all over the place, like me, going from Turkish to French press and all points in between. I said I like the oak lid, but it's a tight fit on the hopper and a struggle to remove. And then, yeah, end grain. Extremely fragile. I thought I'd at least get through the review before breaking it. Well, I was wrong. So, a liberal application of wood glue with plenty of squeeze out and a spring clamp to the rescue. Clean up with a wet Q-tip. Once cured, I finished the surfaces with a couple of chisels. Trying to do this while looking through my camera's swing-out monitor, which I'll allow is bigger than most postage stamps, proved impossible, so I did this off camera. You can see the repair if you pick the piece up and examine it, but it's almost invisible at normal viewing distances, and it feels fine. If you're wondering, I didn't use sandpaper because I didn't want to add touching up the finish to my snag list. All right, let's crack the seals and find out what makes this thing tick. First, look at the Oro's burr next to a smaller one from the SPET. I'm not much of a photographer, but I think you can see that they have the same blade patterns and proportions. That doesn't mean they have the same geometry, though, because coffee beans occupy a fairly narrow range of sizes, which makes them kind of a constant. Scaling the hardware up or down will alter the way the beans flow. They'll move and bounce around differently in a bigger chamber than in a smaller one, and they'll get chopped up a little differently, even if the blades and flats are proportionally identical. Looking inside, I find that the upper or stationary burr carrier has a flat ground into it, so the elephant's trunk can butt against it. Faster grinding means that the coffee will flow with more force, so we have a smaller outlet, plus better seal. The chute has a polished metal insert for less friction coming down the slide. There is a tiny clump breaker too. The chute housing and center cover and the top cover are both still made of plastic. I know a lot of people were hoping for metal in the Oro series, but I'm afraid that hasn't happened. I wonder if the burrs are parallel enough right out of the box. And spoiler, yes they are. I'm going to do a quick adjustment because that's me, but it's not necessary. This is definitely within spec. I like to use small vice grips and turn the motor by hand, feeling for the contact point. I have a video explaining how to do this job from start to finish, so I'm not going to rerun the whole business here. Follow the link if you like. Shimming the burr carrier isn't ideal because it has only 2 fasteners, not 3 as I would prefer. So in this case, shimming the burrs would be preferable, but I haven't got time. I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually. Okay, that looks a little better. As you can see, there's a slight overcorrection here where I placed the shims, but overall the contact is very good. These burrs are within a few microns of being parallel. Everything I've seen so far is well made and, I would expect, quite durable. Let's look at the electrical bits. Alright, these fasteners really bug me. You find them in all the Mignons, and I suppose if they were a problem we would have heard about it, but I really hate the sight of wood screws in metal. I'm tempted to drill it out and tap it for proper machine screws. And the cap is held with zip ties? Seriously? A couple of capacitor clips would hardly break the budget, guys. The inside surface is powder-coated generously, and I'm really pleased. Stray coffee grit should slide right down it. The wiring and switches are reasonably well done, and I've got no complaints there. The leads are long enough that you can half pull the motor without disconnecting it, which is great for that adjustment I promised to show you. And here we go. The knob here moves this rod up and down, which moves the motor shaft, in turn moving the lower burr closer to or farther from the stationary one above it. This spring puts a load on the system so that the lower burr will remain where you set it. Without that pressure, the distance between the burrs would vary during grinding, leading to the wildly inconsistent results I showed you earlier. We can fix this with 2 simple steps. First, tighten the burrs to where they just begin to touch. There's no real need for them to be adjustable beyond this point. They don't need to be tighter than touching, so this position can be your adjustment limit. Now, with the burrs in that 0 position, turn the nut here so that the spring is almost, but not quite, fully compressed. As you can see, I've left a little space between each of the coils, but not a lot. Now, when you loosen the adjustment knob for coarser grinding, the spring will maintain enough load that the gap between the burrs will remain constant. Here's another serious issue that I mentioned earlier. The gate valve is mounted in a narrow slot that pinches it. That makes opening it a struggle, and the sharp metal makes you hate it even more. This is a really important touch point, one that you interact with every time you use the device. Operating this gate should give you pleasure. It should be the best made part of the grinder. Instead, it's nasty. If you use it repeatedly, it will make you bleed. It sabotages the user experience completely. I fixed mine by sanding the lower face. When the design is cut, burrs form on the bottom surface. Those burrs catch the edge of the slot, making the action all but impossible. I also had to sand all around the edge to make it smooth enough to where I don't hate using it. This seems like a small matter, but I think it's the single worst failure of the grinder. There was talk online of the Oro XL having a problem with coffee bypassing the elephant's trunk and building up inside the chassis. I put about 200 grams through this one, half of it for pour over and half for espresso, consistently using the bellows on each dose. I don't actually know what I'm going to find here. Or, I didn't when I shot this. And by God, that's a lot cleaner than I expected. Well done, Eureka! Now, this thing shakes violently and makes entirely too much noise, so naturally I wanted to fix it if I could. The motor is mounted on rubber bushings that relieve vibration well enough when it's vertical, but I thought that because of the forward tilt, the motor's movement might need to be arrested at the bottom too. I think for longevity, the motor has to stop trying to escape. So I rigged up a test with some tongue depressors and duct tape. And yes, I know wood is far from ideal for sound dampening, but I'm only testing an idea here. I need to emphasize that this is not a fix or even a hack. It's proof of concept only, and I removed these items immediately after checking the noise level, which fell 10 points, from 75 decibels to 65 decibels at idle, but rose back to 90 under a load. Well, you can't win them all. But this clearly is a direction for Eureka. They need to devise a simple movement and sound damper that fits the lower part of the motor properly. I can think of several inexpensive designs offhand, and far better materials, and I'm sure they can too. I was wondering, could we use the Oro's hopper and bellows on other Mignons? The short answer is no. The hopper's neck isn't compatible with the older style of rubber seal. The new grinder's top seal is meant to mate snugly with the new upper burr carrier, so modding would be required to make this fit. And what about tilting the Mignons? Could we get the same angle? Well, again, I'm afraid not. Without a much larger base, this would be unstable. So again, you would have to mod it. And you would probably run into the problem with motor vibration, although I haven't actually checked that. I imagine a lot of viewers are wondering, if you already have a Specialita or a Niche Zero, should you consider upgrading to this? Oh God, no. In some ways, it's a downgrade. The Oro is so similar to the Spet that the only major improvement is speed and lots of snags. And if you're using a niche, well, this isn't an upgrade so much as a different type of grinder, which you might like better or you might like less. So who should consider buying this? In its current iteration, caffeinated gearheads. If you're someone who can deal with an interesting work in progress that's still at least partly a prototype, this could be an enjoyable challenge. Like all the Mignons, the Oro has charm. It's frustrating and kinda lovable, and it grinds coffee really well. Judged solely by what slides down the chute, it is superb. I'll be keeping mine. But if you're a beginner in the prosumer marketplace, I would steer you toward a Specialita or a Niche Zero, or a Baratza Sette 270 or Vario, or perhaps a quality hand grinder for real ease of use. The Eureka single dose is buggy and ill-tempered, and it needs an owner who can take charge of it. Think of it as the Linux PC of the mid-range grinder market. It does an excellent job for those who know how to make it work. I can easily picture a hacker or enthusiast community sprouting up around this machine. I would certainly get involved. Well, that's about all for today. I've got no idea what I'll do next, but I'm sure you'll love it in any case. So keep in touch. Cheers!